Ladies and gentlemen from around the world, my name is Christopher Newell, bringing you part 3 of Inessential Outbursts, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. Oh, this is a hard one to record. I'm doing this sort of freestyle and not scripting anything because I think it's more indicative of my time with it. I just ramble for a good 3 to 4 minutes about it, as opposed to, actually have some structure to the review. It's a hard one to record because basically I've lost interest in the game at this stage. And that's a real shame. Before I go any further, I must say something. I'm about 60 hours into the game, and I'm about halfway through the story. That's not representative of everybody's experience. I've been doing a lot of side ops and stuff, which maybe is the problem. But 60 hours, the gameplay loop is solid. It's one of the most solid gameplay loops and has some of the most incredible hooks I've ever experienced in a video game, and it's one of the best sandbox games ever made as far as I'm concerned. But 60 hours of any game, regardless of how good the gameplay experience is, regardless of how well the mechanics fit into everything overall, if the narrative isn't there, I'm not interested. And it's different if it's a multiplayer game like Dota 2 or Call of Duty or Team Fortress or whatever, because there's different things established, and that decides whether you continue or not. Plus there's that competitive element, but that's for another time. And as a single player experience, obviously it needs to be driven forward, the Phantom Pain. And this is just for me personally, but after 60 hours, it doesn't matter how good the gameplay loop is. As I've said, like, if it doesn't establish the narrative well enough, if it doesn't keep me interested in the story, I'm not going to continue. And that's exactly the problem with Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. For me, personally, this is not indicative of your experience, hopefully, because I'm glad that lots of people have played through it all the way through and think it's a 10 out of 10 best game of the year. I still think it's one of the best games of the year. But I don't think it's narratively consistent enough to keep me interested, and that's what I needed at this stage of the game. That's what you need in most stages of any single player game when you're halfway to 3/4 of the way through. You need a reason to keep going, because by then you've been playing with the same mechanics for, I don't know, in most cases it's 10 or 12 hours, but in Metal Gear Solid, which is indicative of how good of a game it is, 60 hours I put in. And the narrative just isn't strong enough. It isn't strong enough, and that's a real shame for a number of reasons, but I think the top reason is that Kojima has been touted for me as being this master of storytelling and crafting these incredible narrative experiences and tying the gameplay into that and stuff. But I think it's such a monumental failure in that regard, The Phantom Pain, because it's so, the narrative, and again this is just me, but I find it so boring and so inconsistent and so few and far between. There was never really a moment in The Phantom Pain that made me go, oh, wow, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. There was never one of those moments for me. And the moment I actually put the game down, and minor spoilers here for people who want to know literally nothing about the game, there's a villain introduced in the prologue section of the game called the Man on Fire. And you don't see him again, or at least I didn't see him again, up until about this 50th, 60th hour. And if I'd have been introduced to him within the first 20 hours, I'd have been like, oh my god, here he is, this is the guy, here he is finally. But because I had to wait 60 hours to see him again, to hear from him again, it was just so like, okay, here he is, he's finally here. Jesus, what took you so long, mate? Christ almighty. And the boss fight is so mediocre, and whether it's a boss fight or not, I don't know. But I've only had 2 boss fights, what you could call boss fights, up until this moment. And there's a problem there in and of itself there. There's only been 2, but they both have been very, very weak. And from what I've heard and from what I've read, that's representative of the boss fights for the rest of the game. They're very unimpressive, and a lot of people feel the same way as I do, that they just want the experience to be over. And yet games are long by half anyway, regardless. At least a quarter, for the majority of the time. There seems to be this obsession with length. Around about 8 to 10 hours for a normal linear single player experience is fine, and around about 30 hours for an open world experience is fine with me. And maybe you can do the Phantom Pain within that time, but you'd be skipping over a lot of the big chunks of the game, which is the side ops, which is the investment in getting materials to take back to Mother Base and build a bigger base. And maybe that's just a problem with me. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe it's my fault that the game hasn't ended quickly enough. But it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, because the narrative still would be uninteresting, inconsistent, and downright boring. And that's the biggest problem I have with the game. Quiet as well is a character that I think is... it's cringeworthy the way she's been written and represented, and, you know, let the social justice warrior fucking come at me, but yeah, it's such a shame because I was so looking forward to it, but it still is one of my games of the year, and it will make it into the inevitable top 10 game of the year list that I do at the end of this year. But I thought that it could be one of the best games ever made if the narrative was more consistent. And yeah, that's about all I have to say on it, really. And I'm sorry that this last part, has been so negative. But I think I've talked a lot about the positive things in the game in specifically the first episode. Because nothing has changed from that. I talked solidly about the mechanics and the environments and the art design in that first part. And I think that still stays true now. Nothing has changed on that part. I still think it's one of the most beautiful, mechanically solid games ever made. It's just the other things that sort of let it down, really. But yeah, I'm going to shut up now because I'm looking at the timer on Audacity and I've been recording for about 6 minutes. And this is called Inessential Outbursts. I've been trying to keep these things below 4 minutes. So I'm going to shut up now. Please do go out and buy it, and please do share in your comments or just talk to me in general about how you felt about the game, because I'd love to talk about it. I've only got a couple of people who've played it to the same extent that I have, and they're either too busy playing it or I haven't seen them in a while to talk about it. But regardless, I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. So please do comment, like, share if you want as well, subscribe, that would be great. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. There will be another episode of Inessential Outbursts in the future. I thank you very much for listening, and hope you have a very good day. Toodaloo!